EP. Oh, yes, now it's recording. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this later, also about the dream hair study. You see, just to give you an idea of the sample size. So as I said, we have 3,865 expectant mothers and fathers included, and 25 persons in the qualitative sub-study, 670 adults in the dream hair study, plus the children. That varies a bit because we have a little less than 300 children in the T1, just right after birth. But at T2, when the hair has gone somewhat, we have a little bit more than 300 children included. And the Dream Corona subsample includes 1,057 individuals, and the qualitative subsample 7. So if you want to know more about the study, you can also read our study protocol, even though it's not quite up to date and things have changed much since, but gives you an idea at least. So if you return to fathers and partners, we know that similar to mothers, also fathers have elevated risk to suffer from perinatal depression and anxiety in the perinatal period. And some members of the cost action, and we were recently also conducting a systematic review and meta-analysis. And we found that the prevalence of CVPTSD was approximately 1.2%. So it's not that high, but we still think it might be relevant. And why is it also important to look at fathers' mental health is because they're more and more involved in the family. And so how they feel also has implications for the maternal mental health and family relationships, both in the couple and also for the child. And of course, their mental health has implications for child development. So you see, it is maternal and paternal mental health is really related, both cross-sectionally, but also prospectively. We did a meta-analysis recently where we saw that both maternal depression predicts paternal depression later on and vice versa. So this really has implications how fathers feel, even though they might not carry the child. Anyway, in depression, I mean, that's also the case maybe in non-perinatal psychology, but we believe it might be that the father's depression might have a little bit different symptom representation, in the sense that fathers might more, instead of expressing sadness, they might more express aggression or substance. They might engage in substance abuse or commit suicide. And we know from non-perinatal studies that they much more often commit suicide than women. And there's also some evidence suggesting that that perinatal paternal depression might be more characterized by some general distress. But this is all just emerging research. So there's really not much, especially not much longitudinal. There are not many longitudinal studies. That's why we looked at in DREAM in a sample of 1,027 expectant fathers. And there we wanted to see how the depression unfolds. So we used EPDS, which is the most common measure to assess perinatal depression. And we looked how whether these items, whether they might actually form latent classes, unobserved subgroups. So we could see profiles of depression in the fathers. And so we tried to, we did a latent class analysis, and then we wanted in the next step see, okay, so if we have these classes, which covariates can predict these classes? And we included a number of covariates. And then in the next step, we want to see, this is depression in pregnancy, how does it develop until the postpartum period, and are there changes? Like this we did in a latent transition analysis. And as you see, we could find 4 different differential profiles of perinatal depression. And the biggest profile was the non-depressed group. 66% endorsed nearly none of the items. Whereas there was the second largest group, anhedonic class, with 17%. There's this blue line. They often said they were not able to laugh and see the funny side of life, or they didn't look or forward with enjoyment to things. And then the third group, the anxious worried, that's like the yellow, you see they endorsed very much often these items. I've blamed myself unnecessarily. I've been anxious or worried for no good reason. So there were 13% belonged to this class. In the smallest group, 3% were depressive and they endorsed almost all of the items. And then we looked, like I said, which covariates might predict a membership in these classes, and specifically perceived social support and relationship satisfaction were protective. And in the, like I said, we did the latent transition analysis. Here we wanted to see how stable is it, right? And we see the most stable group was the non-depressed group. Those almost who were in pregnancy were not depressed of the fathers. 89% did also stay not depressed. And the least stable group was the depressive group. So they became either, they became subclinical and hedonic or anxious worried, or they became not depressed. So now I'm repeating myself, like we don't know much about other family members. And I mean, even though there are some emerging studies on fathers, or maybe also studies on fathers and mothers, they're mainly looking at them in parallel and they neglecting the interdependency of mothers and fathers. So I'm gonna come back later to that point, how they actually influence each other because they have common experiences like the same childbirth, or they have the same child. So in co-parenting, I think we should really look at this. But also what I also wanted to talk is about that if we look at partners, we usually have the biological fathers that in mind. And there was, recently also an editorial by Zoe Darwin and Mary Greenfield saying that we are sort of in we still having a sort of heteronormative framework. That's how we think. And we think that, okay, it's just a partner. But we don't know whether when we look at partners in perinatal mental health research, is it their sex that might make a difference, or is it being a partner? So we conflate the role and the gender. And I think it's important to also try to disentangle that in the long run. Because we know, even though there's really little research, we know that lesbian and bisexual biological mothers, they do have higher rates of depressive symptoms. And because also some reason may be stigma, they may, or also other challenges they meet, like the exclusion, they have to often do assisted reproduction, and also have legalizing problems as parents. And they get treated, so as risk factors that have been identified is that they are not treated as the true parent, or that they don't get parental leave equally or as easily, while protective factors that have been identified are, among others, relationship satisfaction that might help them to not get sick. So I thought to share a little bit also from our experience, from our study, because we try to recruit inclusively. And as you see, even though we always approached the couple, both parents, there was only 42% versus 58% of women, 42% of men versus 58% of women who were participating. And then we see also, not only are they participating less often, but also they drop out more easily, men. And there's also we think we see also a selective dropout with the men. They are often less involved in childcare, those who drop out, or they have also less progressive gender role values in the sense that they don't engage so much in the family life. And like I said, we were approaching always couples or becoming parents. And if you look at the numbers, we have 2,230 women or expectant mothers to start with, 1,600 male partners and only 16 female partners. So it was very hard to recruit those. And so in the former studies we've done so far, we usually, most of the time we had to exclude them. Sometimes, and it's not so important whether they are the biological mothers, we also keep the women in the sample, but it's really hard to include them in our research, even though we have a relatively large sample. So at the moment, we feel we can mainly sort of do case report studies if we want to also look at them. But I think we're gonna do that, but it's not happened yet. And as I said, the wider family doesn't only mean partners. Also, maybe we should prospectively think about the role of grandparents, siblings. There's really not so much done in our field in the perinatal mental health research that I'm aware of. But I think it also has implications for the transgenerational transmission of birth trauma or mental health problems, and it might also have implications really for our field. And at the same time, so again, the risk factors, but also thinking about the wider family as them being a resource and providing social support, so they can actually really also be considered a protective factor. So I think it would be really exciting to make even larger studies and look at how maybe looking at the several generations in the future. Yes, so what all I was talking about now was we're still in the bubble of our Western research, I believe. Most of what we talk about is really happening there. But as I said, we should also think more about other non-Western populations. And that's why I thought to show you an example where we try to explicitly include low and middle income countries. And this is the study Intersect that is led by Susan Ayers, of our vice chair at the Cost Action. And yes, I think you all know her. And also many of us are here PIs from the respective countries and provide data to make a really like a global research project. Because most research, as you are surely aware of, has been on CBPTSD has been conducted in the high-income countries. And there's also the thing is that those usually, even though we talk about the problems of the maternity care, and we've been talking much about it in the United States, still we have very good access compared to other countries. And in the low and middle income countries, nearly as very little research has been done, and they really face the problems of having low access to maternity care. They have higher levels of socioeconomic disadvantage and are also more likely to experience health inequalities. And we don't know yet, but there might be really cultural difference in the experience of birth trauma. At least from the non-postpartum populations, we know that the prevalence and symptoms of PTSD may really in part depend on cultural factors. For example, what is deemed as a traumatic event may really partly be cultural, or also the symptoms shown by those with PTSD, they may vary across different cultures. And on top also the strategies how to cope with such symptoms. And that's why in Intersect, the primary aim is to determine the prevalence of CBPTSD across different countries and cultures, and see how it develops, so determine the etiology of it, and also determine differences in symptom presentation. And the secondary aim is to establish the cross-cultural validity of the sleep bits. It's I'm sure many are aware of this scale. It's the first diagnostic tool to measure birth-related PTSD according to DSM-5 criteria. So I wanted to show you this slide. I hope it's complete and I haven't forgotten anyone. You see, many validation studies have been ongoing. So many have, it has been translated to many languages. And recently also, there's been a partner version released by Susan Ayers' group, first author Rebecca Webb, and also recently, just a few days ago, we were able to get the German version accepted. So it's Intersect is progressing. Now I thought to move on to some more methodological issues and talk about the little bit about dyadic and triadic designs. Because if we return to the idea that it's important to look at more than just the mother, maybe her child, we need to think about the dependency of data. And I thought to show you this a little bit more on two examples of the dream study. I think I've said this. So move on. Yeah, so there's two studies done by PhD students of mine. This has been already, the first one has been published, the second is in preparation. And in this first study, we wanted to see whether there are differential predictors in mothers and fathers for CBPTSD. And we want to see which factors act as predictors of PTSD and whether there are differences between them, because we included mainly factors that we knew were important for mothers, but also as this is also a focus of the dream study, we also thought we include the work factors and see whether that could have also play a role. And to show you this, this is just to tell a little bit about the design behind what we did. You might be surprised. So this is like we included 1,146 mothers and 828 fathers. And this is dyadic still because we handled the missing data by using FIML. So we could still have each unit of a family. We could still, even though we didn't have data sometimes for the fathers or the mothers, we still had family units for each estimation that we calculated. And first we formed latent factors of CBPTSD with help of the 3 symptom clusters. And then we regressed them on the predictors of mothers or fathers. And just to show you an example, because this is just an example here, depressive symptoms were completed by both mothers and fathers. And then we also had some predictors that were only reported by mothers, which we thought were more the objective markers. So we didn't ask the fathers about, for example, pregnancy complications. And still, while here, when we had reports from both partners, we could regress on the mothers or on each of the informant symptoms or predictors, but we could also regress on the symptom level of the partner. And in the cases where we only had mother report, we still accounted for the interrelation or the association of PTSD in both partners. So what did we find? You see that this is just for simplification. I presented in parallel, but we did this, as I said, simultaneously for mothers and fathers. And here you see the results for the mothers. Little bit as expected, mental health factors, depressive and anxiety symptoms, predicted CBPTSD, and also pregnancy-related factors and birth-related factors. And it was a similar, not quite the same picture in fathers. There were some other birth-related factors that were important. And on top also, we saw that sociodemographic factors, that is lower education, was a risk factor in having the first child. And also for fathers, work seemed to be important. So if they had reported lower job satisfaction, they were more likely to develop CBPTSD symptoms, and also if they had a higher job burden. And here that was, then we wanted to test formally, are these predictors really also different statistically from a statistical point of view? And we saw that in mothers, it was important how well they felt supported during birth, and when they had an unplanned cesarean, that was, these were risk factors. And in fathers, it was job burden, which didn't have a say in mothers. So we did find differential predictors of CBPTSD in mothers and fathers. And for fathers, really work-related stress factors were important. Now, I'm showing you another example. This is a study Lara is doing. Some of you, I think, know her. She's also part of this cost action. So she tries to look at how does birth experience and parents predict parent-child bonding. This is just like basic model. I show it to you a little bit more and then we full model afterwards. And we see, she wants to see how birth experience in both parents may predict the bonding, but mediated by mental health factors. So this is not shown here. And this, she uses the actor and partner interdependence model, where she can estimate actor effects. So the parent, how's their birth experience predicting the bonding to their child, but also the partner effect. So might it also have an effect on the bonding of the other parent? And these are the results with the example of depression, because she did it with depression, anxiety, and CBPT. And you see that maybe as expected, birth experience was had a negative impact on mother-child bonding, and also the same goes for the partners. And these effects were each mediated by depression. What's interesting, I mean, we try to do this nice model and we try to account for all the partner effects, but then again, we only found the actor effect. So the birth experience of each of the partners did not impact on the depression level of the other partner. It did also not impact on the bonding. So we only found the actor effects. And this is, like I said, just an example for depression. Anxiety was a similar picture, just there, it was only mediated for partners. So birth experience, the relation to the bonding was mediated by anxiety only for partners. And maybe what's interesting, when we looked at it with PTSD, childbirth PTSD, birth experience predicted PTSD, as we know from also many former studies, but again, it was not predicting the bonding. So PTSD was not a mediator for bonding. I think there's been quite some different studies trying to disentangle just this relationship between CDPTSD and bonding. And we could again show in our data it wasn't related, and also not in partners. So to summarize, both parents' birth experience predicts bond to their child up to 2 years, and only depression mediates this relationship, and then anxiety in partners. And I think what would be exciting in the next step would also to see if we, once we find these differential effects of depression and anxiety, also see whether in the next step it has maybe implications for the child development or other child health outcomes. So maybe even apply triadic approaches. So now let's move on to another topic. I thought to also talk a little bit about psychobiological aspects of perinatal mental health research. So let the body talk. Because I mean, I've been talking now about how we can extend our understanding of the processes happening during the perinatal period by including the whole family. And when we also include psychobiological aspects, it allows us to paint an even more complete picture of this period. And then we don't just restrict ourselves to questionnaire-based or qualitative data. And we want to also include the biological processes. So let's look what we can see there. Because I don't know how familiar you are with that, but when we include oftentimes, I'm trying to explain this better in the next slides, but when you are experiencing perinatal ill health, it might also manifest on the physiological level. So there are biomarkers that really show what's going on mentally. And so it's really exciting to also look at endocrine and epigenetic influences, because then we get a more holistic understanding. And in that way, we can really see how family members influence each other also on a biological level. And this has also been talked much about when we talk about mechanisms of intergenerational transmission. There also the biological level plays a big role. And we believe that when we are more and more disentangling these associations, it might also inform us for targeted early intervention and prevention strategies, because if we identify the respective biomarkers, we can also do something about it. And that might even inform new avenues for pharmacological treatment. We know, for example, in the non-perinatal context, it has been shown that the administration of hydrocortisone can have a preventive effect on the development of PTSD. So that's why I'd like to tell you a little bit about our endocrine sub-study Dream Here, and where we really want to investigate transgenerational processes of stress regulation and mental health related outcomes of the whole family. I don't know, I'm trying to explain this a little bit because I don't know how familiar you are to this approach. But in Dream Here, we use hair samples of both parents and their offspring. You see a picture here, how this is done. So we take a small hair strand or two, and then you see that 1 centimeter, and the closer to the scalp, the closer it's in time. So 1 centimeter of your hair that has grown out equals 1 month of steroid secretion in retrospectively that has been happening. So usually we say like maybe we can take up to 3-4 centimeters of hair, and then we can validly and reliably determine the secretion 3 to 4 months back in time. And what is really also exciting about is because when we take care of the children just after birth, because in women and the partners, we take the hair in pregnancy, but what's exciting when we take care of the newborns, we can actually say something about the HCC exposure and their steroid secretion in utero. So that's why we think this is really exciting. And surely just a repetition for many of you, but you see that the HPA axis is displayed. And you may say that this is really the HPA axis is really the body's central endocrine stress response system. So it's activated when the individual feels a real or like a perceived threat to their homeostasis, like we may say like when we lose our balance. And as a result, steroids such as cortisol are released. Then also the endocannabinoid system, like the neurotransmitter system, has been shown to respond to stress. But really we know very little about endocrine changes in the perinatal period, and even less about their effect on family outcomes. Still, we assume, or one can assume that an appropriate regulation of the stress response systems is crucial, while an altered steroid secretion has been linked to both physiological and psychological disease. For example, the depressive, anxiety, or PTSD symptoms. And oftentimes we conceptualize the maternal steroid secretion during pregnancy as a mediator. So you say that stress, perinatal stress or prenatal trauma might impact or might predict the steroid secretion of the mother, which again may have an impact on her postnatal mental health, but also on the infant's steroid secretion and the infant's health and development. So it's really an important mediator. And to return to our own sub-study and our results, I thought I'd give you just like a very quick peek of our first results, not been published yet, but hope that this is going to happen soon, and just give you an overview. So we found that in pregnancy, higher maternal depressive symptom levels, they were associated with also higher intrauterine HCC of the infants. So that was a cross-sectional association. But in the postpartum period, we did not find such association. We also looked at birth experience of mothers, and we could see that both the objective and the subjective birth experiences, were associated with infants' HCC at 8 weeks postpartum. And in turn, also the infant's HCC predicted infant development at 14 months postpartum, but only in the gross motor and the problem-solving domain. We also looked at other developmental domains where we did not find an association. And also to mention that neither the objective nor the subjective birth experience predicted the infant development later on. And regarding the maternal mental health only, we found that trauma history, like prior trauma not related to birth or pregnancy, predicted the endocannabinoid levels, only the AEA, and the cortisol and cortisol levels. And in turn, also the endocannabinoid AEA would predict again the CB-PTSD symptoms. We didn't find the same for cortisol, and cortisol, they did not predict childbirth-related PTSD, only when we first added the subjective birth experience as a moderator. And I think this really shows that this is very complex, and we are just at the beginning of this understanding the complexity and of all how really this, what's going on the psychobiological level. And to give you an outlook, what we're planning to do, what all I told you was associations of mothers and children. And we also want to look at paternal stress and how this may impact on the infant mental health. And we will also want to see whether stress is differentially transmitted by mothers and fathers. And as you maybe already saw, we also want to not just look at cortisol, but we really look at the broad range of hormones and also neurotransmitters. And we believe that this really gives us, will give us novel insights of how endocrine factors contribute to perinatal mental health and the health and the development of their children. I also thought to maybe just briefly mention another sub-study that we're planning and hopefully starting very soon. It's applies an epigenetic approach. Because we see that also not only do we see that stress impacts on the child, but we see really also more lasting, longer lasting effects of maternal stress levels on the child in the sense of fetal programming. And even though this is a very new field, we see that first studies found profound epigenetic modifications following early adversity. I think Jonathan knows much better about this, and he can surely complement afterwards. But just to show you shortly the design we have. So we will assess the children at 4.5 years postpartum, and we will include 300 triads, mothers, partners, and in that case, fathers, and the child from the main DREAM study. And the selection will be based on their work-related burden. So we will compare those who have little or low work stress with those who are very much burdened by their work stress. And we want to see whether we want to examine the effects of prenatal maternal stress on the offspring's epigenetic profile, and also in addition the joint effects of the prenatal maternal stress and the postnatal parental stress, or that is both parents, on the offspring's epigenetic profile. If we find effects, we want to build risk scores and see whether they again may predict health outcomes in the child. So now I thought to come to the last point, protective factors. Yes, so sometimes it feels when we talk about protective factors as maybe just this flip side of risk factors, and it's hard to really disentangle this. Is it just like a negative risk factor, or is it actually protective factor? And I thought, looking at this also from start a little bit again in psychology, this is like in diathesis stress model, an adapted version by Vichin and colleagues. And you see that when you're exposed to a stressor, you may develop a mental disorder with potential adverse consequences. And of course, there are certain vulnerability factors also that may play in, like genetic factors like we talked about, maybe early adversity. And there are also modifying variables that can go both ways: your sex, your socioeconomic status. For example, if you have low resources or no access to good education, this might even enhance your likelihood to develop a mental disorder. And when you look at it differently in the light of, you could also, instead of vulnerability factors, you might also have resilience factors, for example, high intelligence. And then you also may be lucky to have maybe encounter buffering factors, or that they play in, say, because despite of exposure to stress, and you might have a very good family relationships or social support in other ways that again might buffer and then eventually lead to mental health, which again kicks off not vicious but good circles and has positive consequences. So I think you surely heard about it many times, but we don't think that mental health is just the absence of mental illness. And the WHO has provided the definition and saying that mental health is a state of well-being and the realization of your potential. And while we think of risk factors, that they rather enhance the likelihood of negative outcomes, and when we are talking about the context of the development of disorders, protective factors are rather, they enhance the likelihood of successful adaptation, even in the face of exposition to stressors. And they then enable mental health. So I was thinking, which protective factors have we found in the context of the perinatal period? And I think one construct that really has been quite extensively researched is social support. And it's been repeatedly found an inverse relationship of social support in the risk of suffering from depression, anxiety, or CPTSD. However, again, like I try to say in the flip side discussion, I mean, sometimes it's been not unclear whether social support is protective, if it is there, or whether actually we just suffering, or women or families are rather suffering from a negative impact when it's not there, or when they feel they have poor support. So there is a slight difference in the conceptualization or in the implications of that. And I think even though it's been much research, I think what has been a little bit of a problem is that it's often been very broadly assessed. So especially in, maybe not in qualitative research the same, but in our quantitative research, we often don't know who, in which way was the support? Like how is social support characterized that it's really protective? And by whom was it given? Is it the partner, parents, the in-laws, friends, peers, or professionals? And there, oftentimes this is just summarized as social support, not always, but I think it does make a difference, and we might want to look more into that in the future. And I think also in the COVID-19 pandemic, it's also of great relevance, the role of social support. Because as we've talked much about it also already during the last days, we know that fathers and partners have become much more invisible in prenatal care and in the delivery rooms. They were often, I guess, in Germany it was the case, and I guess in many of your countries too, that the partners were called very late, and maybe even just shortly before the delivery, or even once the child was there already. So then maybe the women felt less supported. At the same time, men were also maybe more able to be at home and take more care of the children because they could work from home and involve themselves. At the same time, again, when we talk about wider families, there was, of course, much more isolation, and young families didn't maybe have contacts with grandparents who couldn't watch the children. So it's really, I think, played a vital role in this pandemic. And we do see that there was a severe impact on mental health, and depressive symptoms have gone up, and anxiety symptoms. We also wanted to, and yes, just one more thing, just also again to come back to social support. There's been some review studies and showing that again, as risk factors, many risk factors have been identified, but also again, lack of social support has been a risk factor for increased depressive and anxiety problems. And again, on the flip side, increased perceived social support has been found to be a protective factor. So we also want to see in our, among our participants in the DREAM study, how they were dealing with the pandemic. And So we approached all participants who were participating online. We couldn't send out questionnaires at that time, but all the online participants, approximately 50% of our sample, we contacted and asked them to complete 2 additional questionnaires. And we asked them about their current mental health, their stress, but also about resilience and coping strategies in that time. And I think many might have been affected themselves, but it was very challenging in these times, especially in the times of lockdown, for parents to combine their work and taking care of their children, because the rule was that in Germany, and I'm sure in many countries, that the children were at home, there was no school or the childcare facilities were closed. So you really had to work and be full-time parent. And that's why I wanted to see how psychosocial work stress may impact on mental health and whether maybe resilience might buffer this relationship. And we did find this, that the work privacy conflict, that means that your work impedes on your private life, was negatively related to symptoms of depression. And so was effort-reward imbalance, the feeling that you put more into your work than it feels rewarding, that you feel that it's more effortful than rewarding. And just to mention, this is not just perinatal context, this also goes up to parents of children up to 3 years. And as expected, those who felt resilience, they were also who reported much higher levels of resilience were less likely to be depressed. But we didn't find it was modifying the relationship between the work privacy conflict and the symptoms of depression, but the relationship between the effort-reward imbalance and symptoms of depression. And as often in other research too, we found also that gender was a risk factor in the sense that women were more likely to become depressed. So I'm summarized now. I think today I just picked some aspects. Yeah, if you look at this figure, obviously it's much more exhaustive, and I didn't talk about anything about treatment approaches. I leave that to other people, but just to summarize, I think we realize that we really know much, but there's even more maybe that we don't know, and where we should do more research. And I just, like in this talk, just scratched upon the surface of many topics. And obviously there would be much more to say to each of them. But what I would like to just repeat is that I think we should extend our research to include the wider family, not just their partners, and also include more culturally diverse populations. And when we do that, we should also consider more their interdependence and adjust our designs accordingly. And then we should not just base ourselves on qualitative or quantitative based data, but also include the psychobiological assessments. And then it would be nice that we also look more into what enhances our mental health and well-being. So just showing you the literature. And thanks very much, especially to my team.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Susanne, for this incredibly, what are the words, inspiring talk where you gave a really amazing overview of the area of looking at perinatal mental health in the family context. Is incredibly impressive, the productivity of you and your team. And I think we're very, very pleased and proud that you're part of our network, and that we can collaborate with you as a colleague. So really, yeah, fantastic, and well done for all that. I wonder if there are any questions already at this stage. If not, I'm happy to start off with a question. So that you're receiving lots of positive comments in the chat.
Thank you. Thanks.
Which is well deserved. Okay, well, maybe I'll start off then with the question. I mean, there's so many interesting things to pick up on, but maybe what I would like to start off with is the aspect of work and the role that work plays for parents. I think this is one of the very unique aspects that I I think you do. It's very interesting that you're focusing on that and including that. And by the looks of it, work does seem to have sort of differential effects also in relation to the well-being and mental health of both parents. So I wonder if you could maybe say a little bit more about that, and also to what extent you think that might be sort of also applicable to other cultural contexts, other socioeconomic contexts, and also perhaps to what extent the age of the child plays a role. That's okay.
Okay, I try to get all discussions. No, the thing is, I think what is we are talking really of the in terms of the German context. I didn't talk too much about this work stuff that we are doing because it's I don't know about your countries, but in Germany it's often still very traditional, right? So you have maybe even equal couples, they share their task, and then the woman becomes pregnant and suddenly she stays at home, and there comes this gap. We talk about the gender gap. And that might be fine for some families, but I think it also really has, can have negative implications, because work is also giving you it may also be inspiring, and it also gives, it's a way of providing resources. So that's, in other cultures, I think it's also, then you ask about the culture, I think it's also, the problem about this is that we're still talking about a little bit from our bubble. We think about, oh, we are privileged and we have this nice work, and maybe from our perspective, it's nice to go to work, but if you are have less fortunate working conditions, or if you in certain countries, it might really not be the case. So that's, I think it's really something to be aware of, that the sort of the privilege we are talking about, what sort of work. And of course, in our samples, also again, couples of little higher socioeconomic status. So they also maybe talk more, what they are reporting is also coming a little bit more from a privileged corner. I don't know what else you were thinking. Was this at all answering your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was just also wondering about, I mean, it was quite striking when you looked at differential predictors of childbirth-related PTSD. It seemed that particularly for the male partners or for the fathers, yes, work seemed to be a very important predictor in terms of, I think if I remember correctly, it was about work burden, and it was about a sort of lack of satisfaction, if that's correct. So
yeah, I think, yeah, I can, yeah, okay. What the thing is that I think that's also again this the context we have, because the fathers, they are maybe in the squeeze, right? They want to be the good fathers and modern and involve themselves, but then they also face quite some pressure from the employer to come back to work. So if they have really much work stress, that might also, and then they had maybe they witnessed a difficult birth, and they don't. I think it's a risk in the sense of that. They still face the stress. I mean, the mothers in that time, usually they don't go and work. And for them, it's, even we did measure this in the, during pregnancy, it still lasts, right? And it's quite likely if they had the stress in pregnancy, it will be similar in the postpartum. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just maybe an expression of stress that then also has implications for their mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like much more work is to be done, also to, I guess, understand better how different types of work play a role, and then perhaps also to look at different contexts, both socioeconomic as well as cultural. So I very much hope that you will continue this work. I think it's very, very interesting. Thank you. Right, I'm just looking at the chat. I don't think that any questions at this point. There are just many positive comments. Would anybody like to ask a question? You can open your microphone and just fire away.
Susan, Oh, go ahead.
Joan, go ahead, please.
Sorry, thank you. Susan, can I just ask, we just surveyed men in Ireland who became a father during the pandemic, either for the first time or for a subsequent time. And we did ask them to complete the EPDS, but we did also ask them about their work situation and whether it had improved or deteriorated. And we found that there was quite a significant number in the sample who lost work during the pandemic. And so that's almost the reverse of the burden. And we're doing the analysis at the moment, but we think it's linked very much with an increase in their depressive symptoms or feeling, you know, depressed and lack of control and so forth. And I wonder, with your online sample that you went to during the pandemic, did anything like that come up? Ours was just a national survey, so we actually got a spread of those who were in very stable, high income jobs and those that were much more insecure. So I just wonder, did you have anything on that?
We did also assess it, but we haven't come around to look into just this thing about how it was when they lost their job. The studies we did so far was mostly on those who had been working. Like we did now several work studies, but then of course the condition was that they were working. But we did ask this, and I mean, of course, we should also look into this. It's just like, I mean, I gave you a peek, but we have so many data, we are barely able to do it all. But it would be interesting, I'm sure. I mean, it must have an impact on their mental health. And I think also what we did look at was also the work stress, those who kept the work, and how this again had implications not only on their own mental health, but also on bonding, right? Because you imagine being at home, have stress, and I mean, many of us had just this situation, and then the kid, and maybe it's not always so productive for your relationship with the child.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. Katharina, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I was wondering, how did you define and measure work burden? Is that only hours or perceived stress or a mixture of both?
Work burden is like, that was like a psychometric scale. So we asked them several questions.
I'll have a look at that. Thank you.
I think it's in the study protocol. I think it says all the scales.
Right.
The COVID study isn't there, obviously, because it wasn't to that, but.
Any other questions?
Yes, can I ask?
Yes, please go ahead, Rosita,
Okay.
of course.
First of all, thank you so much, Susan, for your excellent lecture. I have a question about the evaluation of cortisol level at the hair. This is a very good new biomarkers useful to test cortisol level, to evaluate cortisol level. And it is interesting for also the long-term effect on health, for example, on obesity development and so on. So thank you to discover this. My question is, which kind of methodology has been suggested to evaluate this cholesterol content in this study that you have cited? Because this is the key point for the real evaluation of cortisol level. Thank you.
Oh, now you caught me. No, it's like, honestly, we don't analyze this. Obviously, we don't analyze the hair ourselves. We send it to Kirschbaum, Professor Kirschbaum. You surely know him.
No, I don't know him.
So, Luisa, can you say something about it? Because that's much Luisa's work.
Ah, okay. Just to know, I am curious for this.
No, but I'm honestly in the technical, it's not my expert field.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so all the hair samples are analyzed in the Kirschbaum lab at the Technical University Dresden, and they use the protocol by Gao et al. 2013, and it's like currently best practice, and they use liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry.
Okay,
so
good. It's perfect.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Great.
Any other questions or comments? Oh. No, I think everyone is still digesting. Oh, so there's a question in the chat from Yuta. Sorry, I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Do you also consider less severe symptoms of traumatic births in mothers and fathers, as most people don't develop postnatal depression but have some symptoms, such as feelings of failure, loneliness, anxiety, etc.? I'm sorry if you covered that and I didn't get that.
Okay, sorry, I didn't get the question. Whether you also measure subclinical?
I think that's probably what the question's aiming at, yeah. Maybe Yuta, if you would like to speak up, if we understood the question.
I can maybe answer, I can try and answer, and then we see whether it was that what was asked. Yes, we do, because how we measure the depression is with the EPDS. You might notice the scale that is like the most established scale measuring perinatal depression. I mean, it's been developed for women, and you may say it's maybe not quite correct, but we also applied it for men and it works. And so we can measure, we can say, so we can determine the prevalence of probable depression, but we can also say how is the symptom burden. So we can really, that's what most of our analysis, we actually do that. We don't look at the diagnostic level, we actually deal with more with the symptom level and the degree of the depressiveness. And this one study I showed you on the profiles of paternal depression, there we looked also, we had also two profiles, the anhedonic and the anxious worry class. They were maybe more like a subclinical group, two groups of subclinical depression in fathers. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. I was wondering because most studies, they just, they don't consider a broader spectrum, and they just try to see postnatal depression as it's the psychiatric, definition. But some people, maybe most people, I don't know, I'm not a researcher, they don't develop full postnatal depression, but have, some effects, some symptoms.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. No, I think it's important to not only think those who really would have a clinical diagnosis. I mean, even with subclinical levels, this may have a big impact on your life or on your relationships.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just check, Joan? Do we still have some time? Is that okay?
Yes, if there are any questions left, but what we will do is we won't take a break. We'll go straight to the management committee meeting, which is in the next link in the agenda, because there may be some people ready and waiting for that meeting who were unable to join us for the keynote.
Okay, thank you. So last chance, if anyone would like to address a question or comment to Suzanne.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question which might be a bit stupid, I'm afraid.
There's no such thing as stupid questions, Mito.
Okay, thanks. Makes me feel better. How do you define social support? I'm a bit worried because sometimes we think support is mothers helping daughters or granddaughters, and it's sort of hypocritical sometimes. I would just like to know what you mean, how you define.
Yes, like the bad help. No, I think that was also, I was trying to point at that often we don't know how it is measured or what is actually meant by social support. I think usually often in the psychological research, it's asked, is there anyone in your surroundings that you might call if you have a problem, or are there at least 3 people or 5 people you can count on if you suddenly happen to have a financial crisis? Such things would be typical questions. So if it's assessed in that way, then it's like then it would be the support as perceived by myself. So I would think it's a good thing, not just like something that's actually not good help. But it's often, I think, not always obviously, but often more assessed pretty broadly, and we don't know who was actually the supporter or how did they support me, right? What did they do? It's like almost like a black box. What was helpful about it?
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, it looks like everyone's happy with the answers you gave, and probably still reflecting on all the things that you presented. So thank you very, very much, Susanne, again for your fantastic talk, and congratulations to you and your team on the fantastic body of work that you're carrying out. And I think now we have to disconnect and then reconnect for the management meeting.
Thank you.
Wishing everyone a good day.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sigfriður. Okay. Sigfriður.
Já.